Let's talk about society and politics. Presented by Smith Co.
Hello, and welcome back to welcome back to Let's Talk About Society and Politics. So, in the previous episode, or video, or audio, whatever you like to call it, we looked at Benedict Anderson, and we were finishing up with his theory that there were no great thinkers when it came to nationalism. Is that a claim that you could say, would be a bit of a claim, because he's now perceived as a person who's a key thinker when it comes to nationalism. Well, I don't know, but whatever the case may be, you can decide for yourself, I guess. So, Anderson progressed his theory on nationalism and its sense of identity and belonging by studying how people had previously rejected three beliefs about the society. They rejected that certain languages were superior, which, they're not. Languages are the way people communicate. In fact, technically, you could argue the more simple a language is, the better it is, because it requires less. Well, if a language has less ability for something to go wrong, if you can, teach a language to someone, but they also know other languages, because obviously, you could argue, let's have one common language, but then, there's a problem with, if you want to communicate with someone, it's like, there's the heritage, there's that, but of course, the problem is languages nowadays, if you can't learn, there are certain languages that are just impossible for some people to learn. They're just not able to learn. They learn a word, that's gone by the next minute. Just, they're gone. That's not someone's fault, that's just the fact that they are not able to learn that language, and that's the thing they have there. And that's obviously certain languages are not superior. So, he also pointed out that they rejected the right of kings, to rule, just through the right of God, to govern society. Obviously, it's a bit tough to argue that you've been placed in by God, because, prove it. You can't exactly, because you're one person. It's problematic to suggest that you are, but that is obviously how history has played these things out. So, next comes the origin of the world and humankind were the same. Now, obviously, that's not what I'm saying. That's what Anderson has said, that people rejected the idea that the origin of the world and humankind were the same, that they developed a national consciousness through revolutions in science, economics, and communications. So, obviously, the world is formed through very, not simple, but very basic sort of, gravitational creations. The way the world is slightly harder to get around. Just as a planet, that's how it's formed. Then there's obviously a lot more to get into. Let's talk about how this particular world is formed. Obviously, mankind, a whole load of baby making and evolution. But that's the sort of thing. If you look at this, he also described three paradoxes or contradictions about national identity or nationalism that grew out of nationalist consciousness. So he said that nationalism is a modern concept despite people's beliefs that the nationalism is ancient. He said that nationalism is universal and everyone has a nationality, yet each nation is distinct from every other nation. Not really true. There are multiple nations that are fairly similar to each other. They may be slightly different, but they're not always distinct. Not everyone does have a nationality. If you don't want a nationality, you don't technically have to have one, If you're, just not that kind of person, then that's fine, He also said the nationalism is such a powerful political force that people are prepared to die or go to war for the nation. But the concept of nationalism is very difficult to define. Now, of course, at this point you have to wonder, well, of course, some people would not go to war and die for the nation, because they would go, well, why? Why should I go to war for my nation? How does this protect my nation? Because if I say to someone, I don't really like you, I'm going to bring my buddies from my country and we're going to fight you. And we're going to fight your buddies from your country. And if we win, you're going to be like, I'm gonna make sure that you're like, gonna make fun of you. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, look, you lost. That's not a proper war. That's not a war where you're saying, well, we need this to survive, or you're attacking us, or whatever the case may be. You're not defending yourself. So at that point, some people would say, well, no. Why would I fight? How does this protect my nation? How does this help our nation achieve its goals? How does this actually stop us from being slaughtered? That doesn't. So that can cause problems when people start going down that line. And that's, of course, when people bring in conscription to force people. That kind of is sort of a indication that you failed in your idea that you thought your people would just join all up, but then clearly they went, no. So conscription, not the best policy. Kind of shows a little bit of a callousness for life, especially if you're fighting a war and it's like an actual high risk of death. Anderson offered a definition of nationalism as an imagined political community, and imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign. He was saying basically imagined because it is a community of people who often do not know each other. So, if there's any viewers out there, I probably don't know you. I might know you, but I probably don't. That's the thing. So, if this was as a community, if there is a viewer out there, then we're a community. But I may not know you. That's the thing. It's a community of people who do not necessarily know each other. They may know a couple of each other, but they oftentimes don't know all of each other. Anyway, so he then looked at the definition of nationalism in 5 terms. Nation as imagined, nation as a community, nation as limited, nation as sovereign, and nationalism in the former colonies. So, basically, as of this moment, we're looking at him and we're saying, okay, so what about it? So now we're saying, okay, so if you look at it like this, you might be thinking, okay, so what about elsewhere? What about other nations? That's all good when that's internally. But what about other nations when there? And that's the point. When you get to economy and globalization, nations, for him at least, were imagined communities that further developed from capitalism during the age of communication. In his book, he argued that the novel and the newspaper were the key mediums for the imagined community. Print media had helped with the construction of a national identity and nationalism. So this idea of, we're one group and all this sort of stuff, but they obviously becomes problematic. Historically, of course, multiple countries have, changed their borders. England has taken bits of Wales, physically, actually formed it into England. Europe has dramatically changed its borders throughout the years. America has just completely changed in the past 1,000 years. If you look at the United States of America, was that a country as a landmass? No, and its own states have changed over the years, and that sort of thing. Nations change all the time, so this idea of nationalism wouldn't really keep that, because it's hard to sort of think, well, you were part of that nation, now you're part of this one, so now you from here. But he says that print media has helped with the construction of that national identity. So basically, you can live your own national identity, or you can live a global identity. You are a member of the earth, still technically an identity, but it's technically better. Human race, there you go. That's far better, I would say, because it's more inclusive. Nationalism is, in a way, exclusionist. But the problem is, it's not just exclusionist, it actually causes problems when people go, well, you're different from us. How? It's, you live here, you live there, That's how we're different? Doesn't make much sense. Not much difference there. Your location, yeah, it makes your location different. Doesn't make you different, though. No. So, you live, you do where you are, whatever the case can be, but, that's the sort of thing, Anyway, so I'm not trying to reinforce nationalism here. Just whatever. Anyway, so with a globalized world, with more connectivity than ever before, key mediums have actually expanded. Mass media, modern technology, and new communication structures allow us to communicate our political and economic values across the globe. So, yeah, that's sort of an example of, I guess, this in a way. I mean, Benedict Anderson was technically on the left side, but I wouldn't say, I'm not pushing anyone to left or right. If you're right, be aware you're getting pretty close to fascism if you're too right. But not always. Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, not always best liked people in history. But communism, well, I mean, just think before you go and just choose a political side. Right, sometimes associated with being just being careless with other people's lives and things. Left, not always being seen as very, well, you know what I mean. So basically, that sort of thing. Just, not trying to get you to pick any sides when it comes to politics or economics. So back to Anderson. So anyway, Anderson was, so basically what he's saying was that this had helped sort of spread political and economic values across the globe, but also globalization had influenced this sense of multiculturalism. While transnationalism and supranationalism has actually expanded the community of nations. In opposition to this, an ultranationalism has emerged. You could argue people defend their nation in a way, but it doesn't really make much sense. From what? That's the point. If you don't seem to understand, if a nation is being physically attacked by another nation, you might attack that nation back. But why would you attack the people that originally came from that nation in your country? Because they're not doing anything against you. You've got no reason to fear them or hate them or anything like that. They're not part of that group. They're just because people were born in an area, it doesn't mean they're against you because they're political leaders that aren't even theirs anymore. They were never theirs. Like if I'm living in France, let's say, and there's this political leader, and then I move to Germany, and then France elects a new leader. That new leader is awful and wants to take over Germany. Then me as a person, someone can't turn around to me and go, "Oh yeah, you're political leader." That's not my political leader. I was never in that country when that leader was in power, and I never voted for that political leader, and I don't want them. Or even if you do, that doesn't matter. The point is, you can't develop this idea of protecting yourself from these nations when you don't really have a way of saying, well, that's not a nation. That's not war. If I'm beginning to sound like sorry. I'm beginning to sound like Samuel B. Hunting with, cultures. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that, you just be careful when you have this identity of nationalism. It's like, and it's just be wary of that sort of thing. Anyway, so this has been a very long episode. So maybe actually, it might actually possibly be split in two. Currently, it's calling up to 24 minutes. So apologies if it is split in two, and you'd want the whole thing. Sometimes if it takes too long, then it's like, oh, it's hard to process and everything. It takes a bit of time. But anyway, so please do view the other videos that we have available. Please do listen to other stuff, and please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. All of that stuff does help. So Astro's coming back next time, which hopefully you will do. See you then. if you do come.